Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Raise Your Game podcast, brought to you by 226 Sports. And I'm your host, Brett Swip. Today, we are going down a journey of the catcher position. And what has that evolution looked like over the last, decade? And we have really a great expert who's been experienced in the catcher position to kind of talk about that evolution, not only in regards to himself as a player, but then also now as a coach and trainer of that position. How does that look different, and where did that evolution come from, and where is the catcher position headed? So I'd like to welcome Hunter Hisky. Hunter, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, just kick us off, Hunter, and talk about your journey as a catcher. How'd you get started in the position? What did that journey look like on your end?
So mine was a little unique. I'm sure some kids are probably in a similar boat, but I was pretty unathletic as a youth player. Like I had a little belly on me. I couldn't move around too well, so I wasn't really suited for other positions on the field, maybe third or first base or something like that. But it kind of it was back in the day, it was the position where you kind of just put your most unathletic kid because he doesn't have to move around a whole lot. He can just sit back there and get the job done as long as you got pitchers that can throw strikes. And so that's how I got started. It was when I was 10 was when I first started catching. Um, and I, ended up evolving, kind of learning some of the ins and outs of it from my
Hmm.
instructor, Jeremy Jones, who kind of groomed me as a kid all the way up through high school. And I kind of learned how to move around and become an athlete back there, and how to manage a pitching staff, and all the different subtleties that are involved with the position. And I kind of just had a passion that grew for it, and ended up taking it into a little bit of a career.
Yeah. So when did you start training at the position?
So I kind of similar to most kids that they start the position. Their parents are like, oh well, he's got to know at least somewhat
Right.
how to do it. So they bought me some lessons right away, right when I started catching. When I was 10, started taking lessons for it. Did not know how to block, did not like the concept of getting down to my knees and letting a ball hit me in the chest was foreign.
Right.
um, the concept of catching a ball and trying to frame it to make it look like a strike. I had no idea what he was talking about when I first started. I was kind of just under the impression that you're the guy back there that gets the crap beat out of him wearing the gear, and you just try not to let the ball get by you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I knew nothing about it.
So now when you're around, kind of younger catchers, you mentioned that, you kind of get thrown into the position. I mean, is that still what you're seeing? Maybe youth catchers, how they become, the catcher for their team?
Honestly, yeah. I couldn't tell you how many parents I've had come up to me like, "Oh, his coach wants him to try catching this year," because, but it's kind of for other reasons now. It's like, well, he's got a great arm. Like it's
Hmm.
more so about tools that they do have, and not about stuff that they're not able to do now. The most common one is, well, he's got a great arm, and we hate to waste it at second base, so we're gonna try him behind the plate,
Hmm.
and just see what you can do with him, kind of thing.
Hmm.
So it is a little bit interesting, but there still is that element that, like, the best athletes aren't the ones who are coming to see me. It's the ones who have the good arm, but still, um, their athleticism can't necessarily be used in different spots on the field.
Yeah. Yeah. So now in your journey, when you kind of got up into the high school level, when you got into the catching or excuse me, the college level, talk to us about how your training evolved. What did you notice, when you first started learning the position versus, okay, now I'm the high school team's catcher, now I'm a college team's catcher. How did your training environment evolve?
I think it was a little bit of a roller coaster. Like, when I was 10 and I first started out, and I started to pick up on things pretty quick. Like I found some drills that really worked for me that taught me how to block the ball, and that kind of became the strongest part of my game back there was blocking, and then kind of learned how to have strong hands and receive it and keep the ball in the zone. And my arm was always kind of the weakest point all the way up through high school, really. But my confidence was probably at its all-time high in eighth grade before I got to high school, and then had my eyes completely opened as to how hard the pitchers are throwing at the varsity level, how good the other catchers that I was competing for the same job were. Um, and then so I went from an all-time high of confidence all the way down to an all-time low of confidence when I realized just how much harder the game became as you got older.
Mm.
As the pitch velocities increase, you got no time to react. It feels like, or at least when you're first getting into that space, it feels like you got no time to react. So it was a little bit eye-opening, and I had to kind of dig a little bit deeper and challenge myself even more in training.
Hmm. Hmm. Did you notice, we're going to talk here in just a minute about maybe some turning points in um, the catcher position and how it's kind of changed and evolved. Did you notice that your training was changing? Like, did it look different when you were in college or pro ball, or when did you notice that you were training the position differently?
So, I think the biggest thing as I was going through it was more the mental side and like the game management side of things.
Hmm.
Jeremy Jones, who I'll probably mention several times because he's the one who I kind of owe everything in terms of how I learned how to catch to. He was real big on, if you keep runs off the board, you did your job. If nobody notices you, if you're not constantly going back to the backstop and retrieving pass balls or wild pitches, then you did a pretty good job. So like your job was to pretty much be invisible. Just be kind of a like blend into the game as best as you can, where you're not the focal point. Let the pitcher be the focal point. Let your defenders be the focal point. You just sit back there and try not to take any of the spotlight on yourself. Um, so that was a big thing, was trying not to be noticed to a certain extent. Um, and then just how to manage a pitching staff was a big thing. Now it's a lot of skill based.
Yeah.
Like the trend is all about receiving and blocking on one knee. So in terms of just like the evolution of the position, I feel like the training now is more skill based. Back then, it was a lot of IQ, a lot of mental preparation, a lot of like
Mm.
leadership skills
Yeah.
that aren't necessarily being taught all the time today.
Yeah. That's interesting. Um, we talk a little bit about the intangibles of the position. You and I were teasing a few days ago, and I get to see you catch a lot of the pro guys, before they go to spring training, and I hear you talk a lot about, the catcher position is such a servant type of position, where you're helping the
Right.
pitchers, you're serving the pitchers. Did you notice that you possess those kind of intangibles early on, or obviously I hear, Coach Jones, you talk about how he helped you understand those intangibles. Kind of speak to that. Do you see that in the guys that you train now?
Yeah, it's one thing that I try to do with our high school guys is it's the main position in the game of baseball where it is not about you at all. But at the same time, you have to take ownership for everything as well. Like, um, it is a very thankless position sometimes,
Hmm.
but it is also the most important positions in terms of the psyche of your pitcher and the psyche of the rest of the team, because all eyes are on you at all times. Everybody on the field is staring at the hitter, the the pitcher, the catcher, and the umpire. So if you don't have energy back there, you don't have good body language, you don't possess leadership skills, then that kind of bleeds off to the rest of the team. So you're there not just to serve your pitcher, you're there to serve essentially in some ways the entire team,
Hmm.
and you kind of manage the energy level of the whole team based on how you carry yourself back there. So just getting 14, 15, all the way up to 18-year-old kids to kind of understand that is a challenge of itself. And there's definitely some natural ability that goes with it, and some traits that you have to possess going into it that can't really be taught. But as far as myself, I've always kind of thought of myself as a kind of had a servant mentality. I've never wanted it to be about me. I've always loved like my teammates celebrating their success. I'm very
Mhm.
much uncomfortable with the spotlight on me. So I just felt like it was kind of a natural fit as I grew, because I could just be back there and do whatever I could to help my pitcher out, do whatever I could to help other teammates out that could use me. So
Mhm.
I thought it was a good fit for me.
Yeah, I don't know the statistics, but I definitely hear, people talk about that, catchers become great coaches, and I think that that's probably, some of the makeup, of course, you get to see the field a little bit differently than all the other positions. Is that something that you've noticed, or is that something that you believe as well?
I think so. I mean, the best ones have that. They know everybody else's job on the field. You're
Right.
essentially you're the coach. You're the player coach, basically. And the really good ones are able to be that coach on the field. So you should know what hitters are up, what they've done the previous at bats. Maybe you have scouting reports at the higher level on them. So it's kind of your job to give little reminders. Maybe your third baseman needs to be playing in. Maybe your shortstop needs to be shifting into the hole a little more because it's a righty who likes to pull the ball. You're controlling how the game's called for the most part. I know coaches have kind of gotten into a lot of the high school coaches around here like to call the pitches, which that's fine. But one of the arts of catching is calling your own game too. So you know what's being called, you know what the hitter's tendencies are. So you have to know where everybody should be playing, what everybody's responsibilities are. You're just like a quarterback would know what the wide receivers are doing, what the blocking scheme is from the
Yeah.
linemen. It's really similar in that aspect of it. It's why quarterbacks make really good football coaches. It's why catchers make really good baseball coaches.
Yeah. No, that's great. What's your read on right now? Excuse me. What's your read right now on um, bullpens? Do catchers right now, high school catchers or college catchers, do they like catching bullpens? Do you notice that catchers are more hesitant or reluctant to catch bullpens? Again, I get to see you catch a lot of pro guys pins, and I know it's something that you really enjoy. You really love serving the pitchers that way. Is there a trend that you're noticing? I don't know that I am. I'm just more asking. Is there a trend that you're noticing on catchers valuing or not valuing as much the bullpen relationship?
Well, I've always thought the bullpen is that's the best training you're going to get. You can
Mhm.
go catch all the machine balls you want. You can do all the drills in the book, all you want, but you're not going to simulate a game as much as you can catching your pitcher that you're going to catch in the game. Um, so bullpen is the best training that you're going to get outside of actually playing a live game. So I think any catcher should hunger for those opportunities to go catch the guys that they're going to be seeing in the game.
Mhm.
And it's all about your mentality going into it, like you said. So you got to put yourself in game situations when you're catching a bullpen. It used to be a rule for me that I have to be up in my secondary pretending that there's runners on every third pitch. And
Okay.
then if the ball's in the dirt, you got to block it. If it's in the air, you got to work on your catch and exchange and set your feet for a throw, depending on what base you want to work on. Just a way to kind of keep you engaged and keep you like almost treating it more like a sim game than a bullpen.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's a way to learn your pitcher's stuff. It's a way that you can give them good feedback. Maybe they're working on developing a slider or whatever, a changeup, and you know what kind of shape they're going for. You have the best view out of everybody on it, whether it did what they want it to. So you got to be an honest critic,
Mhm.
and it's the best way to serve your pitchers. As far as the desire from our guys, I definitely see it more at the high school level because I think they've kind of had that eye-opening moment that I had when I got into high school that
Mhm.
like, oh shoot, these dudes are throwing 92 miles an hour. Like
Right.
I
Right.
this is going to suck in the game if I don't if I don't get some reps with them outside of it. So there's definitely a sense of urgency with the high school guys. I definitely don't see that at the youth level
Mhm.
because there is that kind of underlying fear element as you're learning the position. You don't want to block because you might get drilled in the forearm,
Mhm.
or you might some kids still feel fear failure, so they might not want to whiff on a ball. Maybe somebody's got a really good breaking ball that they're scared of. that a 13-year-old maybe throws something that they've that they're not used to catching. They get a little bit scared of it. They don't want to miss it. So there's definitely a fear element that goes into kind of shying away from those bullpen opportunities.
What about the relationship development in the pin? Again, I keep referencing. I always sneak a peek when I watch you catching pins, and I recently saw you doing one, and I heard the pitcher asking you for feedback. Asking you for that honest feedback that you're talking about. Hey, did that pitch do this? Hey, did that? And I hear you engaging and talking and encouraging and being positive, or maybe trying to encourage them to make a change. What about the relationship development of the pin?
Yeah, I mean, it all stems from honesty
Mm.
and genuinely wanting what's best for them. I think you're doing a disservice if you're just a yes man back there. Like, even if it's a bad pitch and they ask you, sometimes it can be a little intimidating. Maybe like, uh, put yourself in a varsity catcher's mentality and you've got a Division 1 recruit thrown to you,
Hmm.
that can be a little intimidating at times, and it's tough to tell them that, hey, that wasn't sharp. Like, hey, that wasn't a very good pitch. You kind of hung it. It broke too early. It wasn't breaking late like you want. Like, that type of feedback is really tough to tell to somebody who you might regard as a higher stature than you.
Right.
Like some of these pro guys that come in, like we got Jeff Hartlieb and Trevor Richards and some of these guys that have spent time in the big leagues. And then you got some of these high level prospects that are going to spend multiple years in the big leagues coming in. And I played 2 years of independent ball. So like, in terms of stature, it can be a little intimidating to tell them like,
Right.
hey, we gotta fix this. We gotta fix this changeup. It's too, you see it right out of the hand type of thing. But you're doing them a disservice if you just tell them, hey, that was a great pitch, great job. You pump them full of confidence and then send them off to spring training to face big league hitters who who
Yeah.
are going to punish them. So it's about honesty and genuinely wanting what's best for that person's and that pitcher's career.
Yeah. That's awesome. It comes from a really authentic place, and I think that is a great trait of a catcher who really understands the position. So, okay, well, this is the Raise Your Game podcast, and one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this. Obviously, you train a lot of athletes at 226 Sports. You work with the extreme baseball and softball catchers. So you get to be in the development environment a lot with catching, and I think we all have seen, with our eyes, that the catcher position looks different. Receiving looks different, setup, and blocking looks different. So there's a lot of skill questions, and it kind of gets a little old school, new school drama, inside of the position right now. We wanted to just spend some time, giving you a platform to educate us. How has the position evolved? How has the skill part of it evolved? um you know uh, where are you seeing it going into the future? What are the important things for catchers to really focus on in development? So that's where we want to go next. Is let's actually talk a little bit about, maybe you can give us some history. When and why do you feel like the catcher position has went through a little bit of an evolution? And then maybe we can go through some of those skills, setups and receiving and blocking, and just talk a little bit about how you're managing that evolution as a trainer and a coach. So begin with the history for us.
Yeah. So I'm assuming what you're referring to is kind of the newer school knee down setup and really working up through the ball that we've kind of seen in today's game. And that,
Yep.
as far as I can remember, that started in like the early 2010s, mid 2010s, like 2014, 2015-ish. Um, when you look at some of the best catchers in the game at the time, you're looking at Buster Posey's, Yadier Molina's, Salvador Perez's, guys who, if you watch them go back and catch in today's world, you would kind of grade them out as poor
Hmm.
pitch framers by today's standards. They were very much on 2 feet at all times. Um, Their premium was on blocking the ball, sticking the pitch exactly where they caught it, no movement after the catch at all. Um, and what they were best at was managing their pitching staff and possessing those intangible traits that don't really get talked about a whole lot.
Hmm.
And then you look at, as it evolved, guys like Tyler Flowers, some of the bigger bodied catchers, and the Salvador Perez's, like I mentioned earlier, the bigger bodied catchers, we found as metrics started becoming part of the grading system for receiving the ball, um, it was optimal to be able to set up as low to the ground as possible. The lower that your hips can get to the ground, that's the lower your leverage is, which allows you to push up through the low pitch earlier. Which, if you want to be able to get a pitch for a strike, it is that low one. If you can get a couple of inches below the zone and make those strikes, it's going to make life really, really difficult on a hitter.
Hmm.
Um, so organizations kind of caught on to really creative ways to get some of those bigger bodied catchers that really produce offensively, but were grading out as poor pitch framers. They tried to get creative and find ways for them to set up lower. And it all started with no runners on base, where you're not really worried about moving around and blocking and throwing runners out. So, like, you saw a lot of the guys, even back in like the early 2000s, like Brian Pena and
Tony Pena, yeah.
Tony Pena, they would set up down on a knee, with no runners on. So, I think the Atlanta Braves, I remember the Tyler Flowers situation where the Atlanta Braves kind of noticed that he was really good in his drill work setting when he could just camp out on a knee, but he was really bad in the game, off of 2 feet, because he was so big, he wasn't mobile enough to get down low enough on 2 feet. So they
Yeah.
said, hey, why not try it in a game? Let's train. Let's train how to block. Let's train how to get up to our feet off of that one knee position, and let's just make that your full time thing. And his pitch grade, or his pitch receiving metrics, went up through the roof. He became one of the top receivers in baseball, and his value went up
Hmm.
instrumentally, because of how much value he possessed already on the offensive side of the ball. Now he was, bringing a ton of value on the defensive side of the ball also.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, I got to see really good catchers when I'm a Cardinals fan, and I watched, Mike Matheny, and then I
Yep.
watched Yadier Molina, and it was like, yeah, Mike Matheny in his career, he never went to that setup. He never went to a knee down setup. He stayed 2 foot the whole time, and he stuck the outside of the baseball, and wherever it was pitched, and really he transferred his knowledge onto Molina, or I would see them work together at spring training, and then it was like you said, it was I can't remember the year, but I remember watching Molina stick the ball and stay 2 foot, just a primary and secondary type of stance. And then out of nowhere in the spring training, I saw him really working on his hip flexibility, and I saw him working on getting underneath the baseball. And it looked like it was like his eyes had been opened up to a metric system that showed him that he could get more, calls, or just be more value to his team that way. And it really did feel like with some of those catchers, it felt like a really quick switch, like a light bulb went off.
Right. Well, one of the things that probably nobody really knows about is that, in terms of metrics, one of the most valuable things defensively that you can do for your team is be a good pitch framer. So if you can expand the edges of the strike zone by just a minimal amount, you're increasing the value, of every, your pitcher, probably takes 100 to 150 points off of the opponent's batting average by just
Mm,
getting those edges.
mm,
So the ability to consistently expand the strike zone as opposed to what it normally is a huge leg up, and a competitive advantage for your team.
mhm.
So there's a ton of layers to this. I could probably talk on this for like 5 hours, but I'll try. I'll try
Yeah.
to keep it as short as possible. Um,
Well, when did you feel like in your personal journey, did you feel your approach have a shift?
A little. I was pretty late to it
Okay.
as a player. I go back and kind of watch tape of me playing, even my 2 years at indie ball. I go back and kind of watch how I caught the ball and kind of cringe a little bit. uh,
Sure.
just because I learned how to catch from what, we've talked before. Like I was a student. I learned how to catch from, I took the basics that I learned from my instructor, and I kind of took pieces out of the guys that I watched on television, and that's kind of how I based my game off of. So I'm
Right.
Kansas City guy. I got the Royals hat on here. I'd learned from Salvador Perez.
Yeah.
Been watching him catch for a decade now,
Hmm. Hmm.
where I tried to emulate everything I did off of him, which he was a very quick catch and throw guy. Nothing got by him ever, but he's always struggled in terms of receiving the ball.
Hmm.
Um, but back in when he first debuted, that was the way to do it. It doesn't matter how you approach the ball, as long as you just stick it where you catch it, you were considered a pretty good receiver. And he won like 6 or 7 Gold Gloves in a row, doing it his way. So I was like, well, I might as well, try to
Right.
emulate the best. But just looking back, the knowledge that I have now and the knowledge that all the catching gurus out there have now, you look back on how I used to play, it's just not the right way to receive the ball. So
Right.
definitely some regrets there.
So when when in the middle of the season at some point, you'll pull up Twitter and you'll see, some of the old school guys kind of hate on new catchers.
Yep.
They'll throw out some opinions of new way catching and reminisce back on the old days. What are they, what are they seeing? What do they harp on? What are they complaining about? What are they, what is it that you see that some of the old school coaches or catchers seem to have problems with?
So I think it's two things. I think it's the setup. They hate the one knee setup. They kind of look at it as lazy.
Hmm.
Which if you really wanted to dive in deep, there were pass balls and wild pitches back in the early 2000s. That's not like a new thing. Balls got by the catchers plenty of times. So it's not like all of a sudden we switch down to a one knee stance and balls are just all of a sudden getting past the catcher.
Hmm.
Um, and then the movement of the glove after impact with the baseball is another thing, just because it's been ingrained so long that wherever you catch it, that's where it needs to stay. The minimal movement after we catch the ball is what we need to do, which I actually agree with certain elements of that, especially when it comes to our youth guys.
Hmm.
um, but all those videos that they pull up in terms of pulling the pitch up, at below the bottom of the zone, I guarantee you 95% of those in-game videos that they show result in a strike call,
Yeah.
with the umpire calling it a strike. So um, I don't know. I'm certainly I try to avoid being in the camp between old school and new school. I'd like
Yeah.
to kind of find a middle ground, because I do think that there's elements of both ways, um, and a blend that is probably the right way for every specific individual. It's just kind of a matter of you got to look at the individual skill set of who you're working with and kind of figure out what they do well, what they can fix, maybe little tweaks that we can make to their setup to try to improve them. So
Yeah. And I think that's the thing is that your argument of a catcher sticking the ball versus funneling the ball, your argument sort of stops with the metrics because the metrics pretty much tell the story that we can catchers can now stretch the zone a little bit more. And it also, I think a fair argument on old school versus new school is what you talked about at the beginning, which is the IQ of the position is probably decreasing because there's so much focus on the skill development side that the lack of development in the pitcher catcher relationship or calling the pitches or situational awareness, back picks, stuff of that nature. Like some of that stuff is probably decreasing, which I think is a fair argument of old school versus new school.
I think in our youth, you're right. Like in our younger kids, definitely.
Hmm.
All that you see on social media is just like, these drills to really rip the bottom pitch up to the top of the zone, and
Right.
and like all these one knee blocking techniques. You don't really see a ton out there on intangibles, and like how to manage a first and third situation, maybe a first and second double steal. If the guy on first is going slow, you throw the trail runner out. Like that type of stuff isn't really out there, but what is out there is a ton of like just drills,
Yeah.
which I'm guilty of myself. I need to be better about putting IQ stuff out. I put a lot of drills out myself because it's
Hmm.
the easiest thing to record and just like, hey, here's a tip. If your catcher struggles with receiving, here's a drill that kind of can help them feel something.
Hmm.
So I do think it's a little bit of social media and just the ease of putting those short clips of just catchers doing drills out there. But I still think at the high levels, your pro guys, your college guys, they still do a really good job of teaching situational awareness, how to manage the staff, because it is honestly the most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's dive into a little bit of the actual training now. So you're training, let's say you're training some youth catchers or high school catchers. Let's go through a few of the sections of development. So just talk us through stance. What are you what are you focusing on? What are you helping athletes understand in regards to, catcher stance?
So first off, we establish two stances for our youngest kids, the ones that are just starting out. We establish a primary stance. That's one that they'll use where they can feel comfortable, get low to the ground. Um, I'll let some guys experiment at, like, even the beginners kind of experiment with a one knee down stance in this situation, because this is going to be with no runners on and less than two strikes, where we're just worried about one thing, and that's making the strikes stay strikes.
Right.
Um, we're not necessarily worried about blocking the ball. Yes, we want to keep the umpire from getting hit. So if a ball's right at us, I would like to think that we have the decency to get in front of it and not let the umpire get hit. Um, so we're not going to train a ton of blocking. We're not going to train any catch and throw out of our primary stance, because there's no need to. We're never going to use that. We're never going to do those things out of that position. And then we go to the secondary stance, which is our second one with runners on or with nobody on and two strikes, where we're worried about blocking the ball. We're worried about potentially having to catch and throw to a base to throw out a base stealer. Um, this is one where for the beginners, we need to learn how to do it on 2 feet. We need to kind of have that old school traditional setup like we talked about, where butts up in the air, our weights lean forward. Um, the best way that I've found to teach it is you get in kind of a defensive stance like you would be in basketball.
Hmm.
If you're guarding a point guard or whatever, then that's kind of the width that you set your feet at, and then you just squat down until your knees get to a 90-degree angle.
Hmm.
So that's the bare minimum, basic, as easy as you can get to create your setup for a secondary stance, and that's how we train our blocking. That's how we train our footwork for throwing out base runners. So it's all about building those stances out. Now, for our older guys that have mobility issues, that, like we talked about, the Tyler Flowers, Salvador Perez guys, the bigger body kids that maybe can't get down low enough in their secondary, then we kind of look into alternative ways to maybe use an athletic type of one knee stance where they can get low enough to still receive, but also move around.
Yeah. So what does that look like in training? How do you I heard you say in bullpens, you would always have kind of a mental focus to get into your secondary stance every third pitch or whatever it was that you said. What how do you train, moving between those stances with the youth catchers?
Yeah, so every drill that we do has a game situation behind it. So essentially, before I'll start throwing, I'll say, "Hey, nobody on, nobody out, 0 count." So they
Yeah.
should know that they're supposed to set up in a primary stance, and then I will call the location of the plate that they need to set up towards. So if it's a outside pitch to a righty, they know that they can kind of create an angle with their body back towards the middle of the plate that allows their leverage to drive the ball back
Hmm.
towards the middle, as opposed to if they stayed square at a square angle. Sometimes, especially at our younger levels, that ball's momentum can kind of hit their glove and knock it out of the zone.
Mm.
We talk a lot about deflection of the bat when we hit. There's such a thing as deflection of the glove when
Glove.
we
Yeah.
catch.
Hmm.
So that's another trend. You mentioned funneling earlier. That was kind of the old technique, is have soft hands, receive the ball, and funnel it up like this. Now we've kind of found that it's more optimal to drive into the ball and extend through it so that we stop the ball's momentum.
Mm.
Um, every ball has a little bit of force to it. We want to match, if not overmatch, the force of the ball with the force of our own glove, so that we're able to stop it in its tracks.
Mm.
Um, so back to the point, I'll call out a situation. Maybe there's a runner on first. I'll say, "Hey, runner on first, 2 strikes," and then give them a pitch and a location, and then we go from there. I might yell runner before I throw it, which simulates kind of a base stealer. They got to catch and set their feet to throw. I might throw it in the dirt where they have to react and go block.
Yeah.
I might not say anything and throw it in the zone where they got to stay balanced and catch. And we'll
Mhm.
find a lot of people who are trying to cheat the drill that end up falling off balance, and it's a challenge. It
Yeah.
is.
You kind of started to lead us down, receiving. So, I definitely think this is an area that is probably, the most time spent on skill development right now. And so, let's start with a 8-year-old catcher. Let's go to a eighth grade catcher, and then let's go to a varsity catcher. What are the verbals? What are the drills? How are you developing receiving?
So it all starts with pocket accuracy, being able to catch as many balls in the pocket of your mitt as possible. So for an 8-year-old who's very new to the sport, you might have to explain what the pocket is. Uh, just like it could be as simple as just take their glove, point to it, say, "Hey, let the ball hit it there as many times as possible."
Hmm.
Um, then as you get older, you kind of teach them how to stick the ball where, like after they kind of get comfortable with letting the ball hit the pocket, then you teach them how to put some force into it and stick it there. Um, because I see it today, even with some of our older guys who don't have that pocket accuracy or pocket awareness. They'll go to stick a pitch and they'll get hit with the ejecto mitt. It'll hit the palm or hit the web of the glove and pop out. So pocket accuracy is the easiest way to be able to manipulate the ball a little bit. And so at the younger levels, I kind of stray more towards the old school technique where it's catch it in the pocket, stick it there, don't let your glove move after the ball hits the glove.
Hmm.
And then as that becomes a habit for them, we start to bleed in a little bit of, hey, let's move towards the zone as we're catching the ball. Um, let's load our glove as the pitcher's getting ready to throw, similar to how a hitter would load his back leg as the pitcher's getting ready to throw. We want to load our glove so that we can work out to it. We start to slowly incorporate some of those techniques as they get older and older and older.
So just yeah, that's great. I wrote down a few things there that really stood out. Talk just briefly a little bit about deflection. Especially with the youth. If I'm a youth coach, what do you mean? What should I look for, and how can I help a 8, 9, 10-year-old catcher minimize their deflection?
So essentially, it's just after the point of impact that the ball makes with your glove, how much movement is there, how much glove movement is there after the ball makes impact. So you'll see it a lot. It's almost impossible to prevent it at the younger levels because
Yeah,
it's a strength issue.
strength, right?
Right. It's a strength issue. So there's going to be a little movement, but we got to work to minimize that as much as possible. And that's where providing a little bit of force into the ball, like I was talking about, can help with that. Because now you're not just sitting still and letting the ball knock your glove back. You're you're matching it a little bit. You're kind of stopping it in its tracks. The best way that I can tell young coaches to look for that is to video every bullpen, video their drill work, let them see for themselves, because a lot of young kids, they'll feel like they're not moving at all, when in reality they're
Right.
moving a foot or maybe even 2 feet after they
Mm.
catch it. So just having that video proof is a big deal for them.
Yeah. So speak on, and kind of maybe transition us to even higher end catchers. Speak on kind of that loading the glove concept. I think that's a great way to get catchers to understand the timing of that move,
Right.
because it feels like timing is always the issue of that move.
Yep.
I see at the high school level young catchers not understand that move, and they they already get back to the zone before the ball's even there. So it was kind of a pointless move.
Right.
Maybe just talk us through how you help catchers understand that glove load.
Right. So the glove load, you look back at even the early days, like the early 2000s, late 90s, like there was some sort of a glove load with every catcher. That nowadays they go all the way down to the ground and then they come up from the ground. You'll see that a lot.
Yeah.
But even in the old, the old school guys, they would still relax their glove just where it was, and then they would go out to grab it.
Hmm.
Um, what that does is it allows you to establish some sort of rhythm and athleticism into the catch. So if you're not rhythmic and athletic in anything that you do in baseball, you're not going to be very successful with it. So if
Yeah.
you're just sitting there like a statue and then you try to go reach to a moving ball, sometimes upwards of 90, 95 miles an hour, it's going to be really hard to, one, catch it in the pocket, and two, stop it, stop the movement after it hits your glove. So
Hmm.
there needs to be some sort of relaxation. And then the hardest thing is the ability to time up your move to the ball that's traveling in. So, human instinct, you got a 90-mile-an-hour fastball flying at your face, or in softball, a 70-mile-an-hour softball flying at your face. Human instinct wants to reach the glove up to where it's going to end up right away. Like, you don't want to waste any time. You want to
Yeah.
get that glove up there. Um, but what we find is that that leads to a lot of what we call reaching for the ball, and kind of our glove ends up working away from the middle of the strike zone to go catch the ball, and then we got two options at that point. So if we work away from the ball as we catch it, we can either pull it back in, which kind of leads to that clunky looking two-piece move that we probably see at the high school level all the time,
Right.
or they just leave the ball out of the zone and we lose the strike. Um, Either way is not a good option.
Hmm.
So the ability to stay relaxed and stay in that relaxed position as the ball travels to us. And just like hitting, if we get way out on our front foot and we lunge at the ball too early, we're not going to be in an optimal hitting position. We have to load, stay in that load, as let the ball travel into our hitting zone and then explode on it. It's kind of similar in catching. We want to get into our load, into our relaxed position, uh, nowadays that is below the zone so that we can work up to that low pitch.
Right.
Um, we want to get into that relaxed position, and I call it let the ball get into our catching zone instead of hitting zone. I call it our catching zone, and we explode on it.
Hmm.
So timing's a big element. I like to start, even with our older guys, we start really slow with it, and then we just slowly progress it to higher velocities from a farther distance away.
Yeah. Take us through a little bit of a drill progression. What does that look like?
So we'll start with bare hand,
Okay.
barehanded stuff. Catch the tennis ball, catch a baseball with bare hand. Maybe even guys who don't have very good pocket accuracy will stick a tennis ball or a baseball in kind of their palm pinky area, so they're targeting catching the ball with their main three fingers, where
Hmm.
towards where the pocket of the glove would be. Um, and then we'll progress to a heavy ball receiving progression where I have some heavy plyo balls. They get to put their glove on. They get to work on creating that force because the heavy ball is going to naturally have a little bit more force than your normal baseball would. So they get to work on putting some force into their catch. And then essentially, we'll just start off with some underhand flips. They get to create their perfect timing, let the ball travel into their catching zone with the underhand flips. Then we'll progress to some overhand throws, maybe at 40 to 50 miles an hour out of the hand. Let them find that timing. Then we'll work back to a junior hack attack machine, um, at 60 to 70 miles an hour from 50 feet away. Let them find that timing, and then we'll either progress to our big spin ball machine or go straight into bullpens from there.
Yeah. Yep. What I know at 226 and Extreme, you also get to do some work with some softball catchers. Are there what are you noticing with that in their receiving? Is there any kind of different focus points or similar focus points? What are you talking through with softball catchers on?
It's all really really similar.
Hmm.
They have to be a little bit better at the high pitch. Um, well, to a certain extent, because they do have some pitches that have a literal uphill
Yeah.
trajectory to them. Baseball, we have some that kind of give that visual, like those really high spin rate fastballs at the top of the zone, but in reality, they have a flat trajectory. They don't have an actual
Yeah,
uphill
they're just holding.
trajectory working in. So we do a little bit more work with the high pitch with the softball girls. But at the same time, they have to be just as good with that low pitch because they throw drop balls, screw balls. Even their fastball has a little bit of downward tilt to it because it does have top spin on it.
Yep.
Um, so it's pretty hard for softball girls. They're really close. They don't have much time to react at all, and they're they gotta be ready for all shapes. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep. Talk about the high pitch. I know that high spin rate pitches are becoming a little bit more popular.
yep,
And I know as a hitting guy, I mean, we definitely speak about handling the pitches that hold. That's kind of that's the words that I would use with
right,
our guys. Pitches that hold. We need to win the race to the top of the baseball.
right.
And so what about catchers? What are some visuals or verbals that you're giving them to handle that pitch?
Yeah, I mean, you said it best there. Win the race to the top of the baseball. Um, Most of the time when we call a high fastball, we can prepare our setup
Yeah.
to maximize our leverage to get on top of that ball. Usually, if it's a high fastball, we're calling it's a two strike count. We're trying to blow a fastball by somebody who maybe has a hole in their swing, doesn't
Right.
really get to. Maybe we have a scouting report. He doesn't really get to the high pitch very well. So we can flash our glove up. We don't necessarily want to get our leverage up there too early because then a coach can start relaying in our setup. We never want to tip our pitches. So that's another thing is I always teach them to set up late enough where they're not going to start tipping pitches.
Right.
But maybe like give a little glove flash just so the pitcher knows, hey, this is where I want to go with it. And then as the pitcher starts to deliver the ball, you can actually sit up a little bit higher in your crouch
Mm-hmm.
to get your leverage up, which allows you to, instead of loading down below the zone, I teach our guys to load to their chest on that, and then that allows them to work above it, win the race to the top of the ball, and actually drive down through it as they
Mm-hmm.
extend.
Gotcha.
Um, so it just kind of gives the visual that it was that pitch did clip the top of the zone. A lot of catchers you'll see will just kind of give up on that high one. They'll let the ball just take their glove back, and we're never getting that strike.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. It was making me think about one of the things that we've been doing with high school guys this off season on hitting is we've been using the softball machine to have a little bit more. The softball machine can throw with a little bit more backspin. It throws from a lower position. It can throw with a little bit more
Right.
backspin. And, I think that posture change, I love how you talk about being forceful kind of through the pitch.
Yep.
It's kind of some new training ways to be able to handle that spin pitch.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing is the pocket is probably most important on that high one.
Mm-hmm.
Just the making sure that we get in the pocket, we make it loud. That's a huge one that catchers don't really think about too much, or maybe coaches don't realize. We create the sound. The catcher creates the sound of the loud pop of the mitt that you hear.
Yeah.
How many times do you hear a pitching coach is watching a bullpen, their dude throws one, the catcher does a really good job with it, it's an explosion back there, they're like, oh man, you must have gotten an extra 3 miles an hour on that pitch, and it's actually slower.
Yeah.
Like we create the sound, and that sound directly correlates to more strike calls.
Yeah.
Just the sound, the presentation of it all kind of is all married together.
That's awesome. All right, we could keep going on about
Yep.
receiving. Let's we got it. We have to spend some time on blocking.
Yep.
We have to help. Again, let's kind of think about young catcher, middle school catcher, high school catcher. Where do you start with blocking? What are the foundations? What are the absolutes? Talk us through it.
So with the younger kids, they have to block from 2 feet. They have to get both knees on the ground. They have to square up to the baseball. We do a lot of work with their glove, not even a part of the picture. We'll go arms out, hands behind. This is the toughest thing to train by far because you're not only training a skill, you're training a mental skill as well.
Yeah.
There's so much fear involved with the younger catchers who are just starting off to get hit, which I mean, it does hurt. It hurts to get hit, but that's part of the deal. You signed up You signed up to catch. You signed up for a little bit of pain with it. So, um, just the first step of it is getting over the fear element. You're not going to be able to be a good blocker unless you can eliminate that fear element and get over that psychological hurdle.
Right.
So just kind of getting them familiar with taking a baseball off of the chest over and over again, where that's not even a thought process. They learn to trust their gear that they're wearing. So that's kind of the first stepping stone. Then we'll start talking about creating angles similar to how we create angles with our receiving. We want to create angles with our body. To really block and kill the ball as close to you as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So at the younger levels, the easiest way to teach it is, even though it's not necessarily the most optimal way, the easiest way to get kids to learn how to create angles is always angle your body back towards the plate. So if you got to slide to your right, angle your body a little bit back towards the plate. If you got to slide left, angle your body back towards the plate. Now, as we get older, the spin of the baseball plays a factor into how it reacts when it hits the ground. So we have to be a little bit smarter how we use our angle of our body.
Mm-hmm.
But like we said, I could talk about that all day. So we'll
Yeah.
keep it moving on that.
Yeah, I kind of was visualizing there. I remember doing some camps when I was a college coach, and I remember the catching person putting hula hoops down, and
Yep.
kind of working on blocking, trying to change your angles to kill the ball into the hula hoop. I thought that was kind of a cool visual.
Yeah, we play tic-tac-toe here.
Yeah.
That's our staple game for our younger kids, and even our older guys love it. Set up a little tic-tac-toe board, you block it wherever it ends up in the square. And then you try to get three in a row. You just turn it into a little game.
Yep.
The more opportunities you can have to make blocking a fun thing, the better and competitive, the better results you're going to get, essentially.
I've heard you when our high school catchers are catching pins. I've heard you talk to them about again, I think it's a timing thing, kind of like letting the pitch develop, like
Yep.
not guessing what the pitch is going to do. Maybe
Right.
talk us through that.
So blocking should always be an extension of the catch, in my opinion.
Okay.
So you should try to catch everything until you can't.
Okay.
Just like when you hit, you're going to swing at everything until you can't. Like you're yes, 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 no.
Mm-hmm.
Catching, your catch, block. So you definitely know as you get older the percentages of, like, okay, slider. I got my guy here. He probably spikes about 30% of his sliders. So I know in the back of my head there's probably a larger percentage that I'm going to have to block this pitch than maybe something else that he doesn't throw in the dirt as much. So you kind of have a little bit of anticipation factor in the back of your head. But the other 70% of the time, he lands it maybe in the strike zone or throws it in the air. So you got to be ready to catch that ball in the air first.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all dynamic. So like there's situations with runners on third base or on second base where we're trying to keep them from scoring, where you might be thinking a little bit block first and you're sacrificing some of your receiving ability. It's all situation dependent.
Yeah. What about kind of the do we fall forward into the block? Do we fall backwards into the block? How do we control the baseball or the softball with our body?
It differs from person to person.
Okay.
Softball, I always teach kick the feet back. You're buying yourself time. You don't have very much time to begin with in softball. Those pitches don't get near as much of a bounce up off of the ground
Mm.
as you do in baseball. It's coming in at more of a flat angle. Even though some of them have top spin, it's still going to be such a flat angle traveling into the ground that it's going to give more of a skipping motion off the ground as opposed to a bouncing. Now in baseball, we're throwing overhand. Breaking balls, especially, have that top spin where it's going to really nosedive and bounce straight up off the ground. So it's person to person dependent based on what they're able to do. So I would love, uh, oops, my phone fell there. Sorry.
That's right.
Ideally, I would love if our catchers could fall forward a little bit on the top spin pitches, the balls
Okay.
that are going to bounce up off of the ground a little bit, because we want to cut down the distance that ball has to hit the ground and travel up higher. So the higher it hits off of our chest and towards our mask, the more things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
Basically, we want to try to get the ball below our chest, somewhere in between our chest and our belly button is ideal for a perfect block. So we want to minimize the distance that ball has to get off the ground. Um, on the fastballs and changeups, we can kick back a little bit because one, they're coming in a little faster, so we're buying ourselves time, and two, it's going to present more of that skipping motion that we see a lot in softball.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, yeah, I think when I watch your catchers train blocking, just about the time they're done blocking, you're always, pushing them to recover or pushing them to get up or pushing them to get ready for the secondary play. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of the recovery, how you train the recovery.
Yeah, so the hardest thing is getting in front of it and blocking, but that's only half of the battle, right?
Yeah.
Like the definition of a good block is if the runner stays where he's at. So and you look at that in multiple ways. So if a hitter has two strikes on him, you block it and you record the out, that's a great block, no matter how ugly, pretty it looked.
Hmm.
Um, if there's a runner on first base, you block the ball, runner stays at first base, that was a great block. So yes, it's important to get in front of it and keep the ball close to us, but it's equally as important to explode up out of our position and get to the ball as fast as we can, just to make sure that that runner stays put, or
Hmm.
else there's no point in getting in front of it at all, right? Like ultimately, if we just if we just tried to olay it and backhand it and go retrieve it at the backstop, that's the same result as if we made a perfect block, took our time getting to it, and the guy got second base. It's You look at the end result, it's the exact same.
Yeah.
One
The
might one might end in a butt chewing by the coach, but
Now I know some of the old school guys may cringe when they come in and watch you work on glove picks, when the ball's in the dirt,
oh
you
yeah,
know.
oh
talk
yeah.
talk to me about, I see that as part of your curriculum. I see you working on that pocket awareness and that glove accuracy. I see you working on that with catchers. Why are you working on that?
So we don't. I mean, we don't do a ton of it. I
Yeah,
don't because
yeah.
especially with the young guys, I'll introduce it. I don't want to. I don't want to dwell on it because it does. I'm with the old school guys on this one. It develops some bad habits if you constantly rely on the glove.
Hmm.
So my philosophy is you want to get your body to everything possible that you're able to get your body to. So we test our range. How far can we explode our body to side?
Hmm.
And then we'll try to figure. I'll try to help them understand what their personal range of motion laterally is, and then based on whatever's outside of that range, yeah, we're going to try to use the glove. We got to throw out. We got to throw whatever we can out there to keep the ball in front. So
Right.
the glove at times is going to be get to a spot way faster than your center mass will. It's just
Yeah.
no, I don't know if anybody's going to argue that your glove's going to move faster than your body will, but we always teach glove first, let the body get there after.
Yeah.
So if that ball just so happens to be outside of your lateral range, yeah, we're dang right we're going to work on gloving it and doing whatever we can to keep runners from moving up. So
Yeah.
but with the young guys, like I said, sometimes we'll work on those glove picks, and it's the most fun that they love it. They're like, "Oh, this is so much better than blocking." And then all of a sudden, you look and you're throwing a ball right at them, and they're getting out of the way and they're trying to pick it. It's like I
Yeah.
got to be a little careful with it.
I think that was Molina in the last couple of years of his career. He loved his glove. He loved his
Well,
glove.
yeah, and that's the other thing is those guys don't even have
Oh,
like they could sit back there and pick everything if they
yeah.
wanted to. They don't even have to block. They're so good with their gloves. It's ridiculous. So
Yeah.
a little bit of if we watch too much, if we live and die by what the big leaguers do, then we're gonna suffer
That's
the consequences a little bit.
it's one of the best phrases that I heard a coach say to me, a college coach say that, I love watching MLB baseball, but that's not the game that I coach.
No, no, no,
And
no. Yeah,
I think that's a good reminder with catchers. So,
yep,
last thing I want to ask on blocking, and then we'll wrap this up.
yep.
There's a lot of intangibles that are needed. You talked about fear. You talked about there's probably a lot of servant leadership that's needed in blocking, where you got to take it's got to be perceived that you take the responsibility, that it's not the pitcher's fault. Talk a little bit about how blocking can really expose good or bad intangibles.
Yeah, so it's a toughness element. You want you want your leader, your quarterback back there to you want him to be the toughest guy on the field.
Hmm.
You, you give off just kind of a bad vibe to the rest of the guys if you're getting out of the way and you're kind of acting soft about it.
Right.
Like man, what's that guy's? I can't remember. Do you remember the speaker in Chicago? The catching guy. You guys had left by
Yeah, I'm
then. I
not
can't
sure.
remember his
Yeah.
name. Man, he was awesome. He said a phrase that it hit home for me because this is how kind of I learned. I was thrown into the fire by Jeremy, my catching coach, and my dad,
Uh-huh.
who were drilling it into me not to be soft, get in the way of the ball. You don't want to be a bad influence on your teammates. This guy was like, I was more scared. When he was talking about him learning how to catch, he said, I was more scared of what my dad would think of me than I was of getting hit by the ball.
Right. Right.
He's like, I was more scared of what my teammates would, or my dad or whoever would think of me by getting out of the way than I was getting hit.
Right.
Like the pain of potentially getting hit in the thigh or the forearm or whatever was worth it to not be looked at as soft by your teammates. It's just I don't know, something about it. That's where those old school guys are right, that you got to be the toughest guy on the field,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Well, that was some fruitful time. Hunter, really enjoyed listening to you talk about the art of catching. The evolution. There's such a growth in the position. The what used to be kind of just stick the unathletic guys back there is really growing into an even greater field general type of position. And I've been blessed to kind of watch you work with athletes of all ages, kind of teaching them the love of the position. And just can't thank you enough for kind of sharing with all the listeners your expertise around catching.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hope somebody gets something out of it.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in to the Raise Your Game podcast, brought to you by 226 Sports. And as you can see, the evolution of catching, it just kind of matches, everything in life. Just continue to try to pursue better ways to do things, pursue excellence, kind of constantly trying to get better. And the catcher position is one of those parts of the game that has really transformed over the last few years, and it'll be exciting to see where it goes. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next episode.
Yeah, we about to lift off. Hey, been here too long. Y'all better wake up. Time for a new song.